Welcome to NDTAC's N&D InFocus. I'm Nicholas Reed.
And I'm Alexandra Brawley.
In December 2014, the U.S. Departments of Education and Justice released the Correctional Education Guidance Package. According to Department of Education Secretary Arne Duncan and Attorney General Eric Holder, the package was developed to spur jurisdictions throughout the country to be creative in taking steps to improve traditional academic offerings and to expand access to career and technical education and post-secondary education options for youth confined in juvenile justice facilities. According to the Secretary and the Attorney General, for these young people, providing high-quality correctional education that is comparable to offerings in the traditional public schools is one of the most powerful and cost-effective levers we have to ensure that youth are successful once released and are able to avoid future contact with the justice system. Today, NDTAC is kicking off a series of N&D InFocus programs exploring high-quality correctional education that exemplifies the guidance package, particularly the guiding principles for providing high-quality education in juvenile justice secure care settings. We'll explore the 5 guiding principles through the lens of states and localities implementing them in order to prepare their youth for college and careers. We're pleased to be joined by representatives from Ohio and Oregon who will share with us their experiences. But first, to provide us with some background on and some context for the guidance package, I'm pleased to be joined by Special Assistant in the Department of Education's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, Joaquin Tamayo, and rejoined by NDTAC Director Simone Gonsolin. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Diving right in, Joaquin, could you tell us how and when the partnership between education and justice really began in terms of looking at and working to address the education needs of youth in juvenile secure care settings?
Sure. No problem. I'd be happy to address that. And first, Nick and Simone, just want to thank you and NDTAC for hosting this webinar and getting this information out into the field. We really can't do this work without you guys, and really value the opportunity to do this work with you. So in terms of the genesis of this work on the part of the Department of Education, I think that work began in earnest in 2012 with a couple of summits that were hosted here at ED in collaboration with a number of private and nonprofit partners, including some foundation support, to begin to explore and really have a meaningful conversation about the state of not only juvenile justice, but of correctional education and the types of climates that correctional facilities, have been fostering for the 60-odd thousand plus youth that are in our youth correctional facilities on any given day. And following that 2012 summit, there was a follow-up summit in 2013, which led to some pretty specific recommendations. One of those recommendations being that the Departments of Education and Justice really do collaborate, much more closely in the same way that we've been collaborating with Justice on implementing the Supportive School Discipline Initiative, which began in 2011, so that the message to both the education and the juvenile justice sectors was not only aligned, but really was signaling the kind of paradigm shift that we envision for correctional education in this country. So that all began in about 2012. We're proud of where we are with our guidance, and we look forward to continuing to work with the field to implement good practices across the country.
And Simone, you participated in those summits and were pretty heavily involved with the guiding principles. What does this guidance package represent to you in terms of where education and justice are in addressing the needs of this population?
I see, the administration from the top, from the White House, down to the Department of Education and the Department of Justice, really moving this forward. And as an educator and a juvenile justice practitioner for, over 35 years, I have to say, in my opinion, this is really the most attention I have seen across the federal agencies and on this particular topic. So I think it's a very, very exciting and it's a wonderful work that we need to continue to move forward.
Now, Joaquin, in many ways, the guidance package is in line with some of the Obama administration's large initiatives that focus on serving high-risk populations, programs like My Brother's Keeper. Can you talk a little bit about that connection?
Sure. One of the goals and one of the priorities of the My Brother's Keeper initiative is to focus every level of the system, from the federal government to state governments and state educational agencies, all the way down to local educational agencies and to schools and into communities, that we focus particularly for the young people that we're talking about on this webinar today, focus on what we can do to keep them on track, and when they do fall off track into the deep end of the pool, like the juvenile justice system, that we figure out how to give them a meaningful second chance. When we think about what it's going to take to make sure all of our young people are ready for a college career and able to pursue their personal aspirations and passions, that means all kids. That doesn't just mean kids who are in community schools. It doesn't just mean our best and brightest. That means every single young person in this country, including the 60,000 who are currently in juvenile detention centers. And if we drop the ball on those young people, those are the young people who are most at risk of recidivism, most at risk of finding themselves in the adult correctional system. And that's precisely the problem that we're trying to tackle with MBK. So the correctional education package and the guidance that was released last December that we're talking about today is squarely a huge part of the My Brother's Keeper initiative.
And you mentioned, Joaquin, that the package grew out of, among other things, a series of summits where you heard from the field their thoughts on what needed to be done in education programs within juvenile secure care. Considering what you learned from those, what are some of the major challenges facilities face in providing high-quality education and career technical training within these institutions?
I guess where I'd like to sort of tackle that question is to say first that they weren't challenges until we called them challenges, meaning to say that when we think about reforming educational services or schools within correctional facilities for our youth, has not traditionally been a priority in this country to make those settings places where young people could really engage in deep, consistent, highly effective education, such that when they left those correctional facilities and back into schools, they were as well prepared and as ready to jump back into the regular curriculum or move on to postsecondary opportunities like any other young person. That just had never really been the mission of most youth correctional facilities in this country. And so, like I alluded to a little while ago, this really is about a paradigm shift. And once we got people in the field to recognize that we're really shifting the mission and the purpose of these facilities, vis-a-vis education for these young people, then you can begin to identify the challenges. Then you can begin to say, oh, well then, if education and rehabilitation are our purposes, then we can't have it anymore that there are no or very, very bad transition plans and services for kids moving between correctional facilities and schools. It just doesn't help anybody, doesn't help correctional staff when they try to work hard to get kids prepared, and it doesn't help school district staff, when they're left with few resources to reintegrate young people back into their, communities. So transition services was a huge challenge that was identified through those summits and through conversations and lots of learning between ed and the field. Another huge challenge is because there are over 2,500 correctional facilities, in this country, public, private. They just sort of come in all shapes and sizes. There's really no consistency in terms of the types of curriculum and remediation and enrichment services that are offered to young people in these facilities. A complicating factor is that young people are in juvenile correctional facilities for different lengths of time, some for very short amounts of time, some for longer, amounts of time. And so it's traditionally been a challenge for facilities, particularly small facilities, particularly facilities that, again, had not been historically designed to serve this purpose, to offer young people while they're committed to those facilities, robust, rigorous curriculum that actually prepares them to succeed back in community schools. And another huge challenge is the recruitment of staff who are experienced, who know how to work effectively with this particular population of young people, not only to help them correct misbehaviors and habits that just will not serve them moving forward, but also can re-engage them in the learning process to the extent that is necessary. So recruitment of staff was another particular challenge. And then I think finally, lots of every single one of these facilities has systems and structures to manage their caseloads, and to do what's required, vis-a-vis federal and state law. But those systems and structures are just, again, all over the map, wildly divergent from each other, with very little data to show what's most effective, for, by and large, for incarcerated youth. And so, really thinking about what kinds of processes, what kinds of procedures really do help to facilitate the kind of transition back into the community school environment, or back into post-secondary or workplace opportunities, those have been lacking. So I think, sort of broadly speaking, those are the big challenges that were identified with respect to correctional education facilities, and that's what Ed and DOJ have tried to tackle.
So I want to look a little more closely at the guidance package itself. I'm wondering, Joaquin, if you wouldn't mind briefly walking through the pieces of the package and discussing how all of the pieces relate to each other.
So in terms of the structure of the package, the first piece is something that we also call a Dear Colleague letter that was authored in December. December 8th is when the package was released by Secretary Duncan and Attorney General Eric Holder. So it was a joint package between DOJ and Ed. And so the Dear Colleague letter lays out what the package is and why we're doing what we're doing, for the 60,000 young people who are confined to juvenile justice facilities across the country. The first resource in the package is something that we call our Guiding Principles document. So it's Guiding Principles for Providing High-Quality Education in Juvenile Justice Secure Care Settings. And so that document, that resource, the Guiding Principles, really does put, as the first part of the package, really does put the educational priority front and center. That we're here to do is to make sure that while our young people, the 60,000 who are confined in our juvenile justice facilities, are receiving high-quality, rigorous college and career-ready education while they're there. In terms of the guiding principles, what we seek to do is to lay out a framework of 5 principles that using this framework, which is really informed by research across many decades in this field, and from practitioner experience and practitioner voice. This was a document that was long in the making to make sure that it was as usable as possible. So what these 5 principles do is create a new framework, a new paradigm, if you will, for thinking about how you construct a really quality educational environment for youth in correctional educational facilities. And happy to go a little more deeper into the actual principles later on in the call. The second piece is a letter that was authored by our Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services to address the rights of youth in juvenile correctional facilities who are entitled to rights under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, and IDEA Part B. So we know from data and from experience that a great number of our youth in correctional facilities are or have been special education students who require important services to achieve their academic goals. And so this letter really does lay out important guidance for facilities about how they meet their obligations under IDEA for students who require such services while they are confined. The third piece of the package is another letter from our Office for Civil Rights, both the Office for Civil Rights here at the Department of Education and the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, and it lays out guidance in terms of how facilities can meet their obligations to ensure that the youth are provided with their civil rights protections vis-a-vis Title IV of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX of the Education Amendments of the 1972, or just Title IX as more commonly understood, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so these letters really do lay out the legal framework for how we envision quality education will be provided to young people in facilities. And then the final piece of the package is another letter from our Office of Postsecondary Education, which outlines the eligibility that young people may have for federal Pell Grants while they are confined. If a young person is confined to a federal or state penal institution, they're not eligible for certain services. However, when they're confined to juvenile justice facilities, they may be eligible while they're confined for federal Pell Grants, which can serve to help pay for things like community college courses or other educational opportunities that they can take advantage of while they're incarcerated to prepare for pursuing such opportunities, after their release from confinement.
And Simone, as NDTAC director, you're pretty clued into the field of juvenile justice education administrators and practitioners. What are your suggestions for how the field can use the guidance package to further their efforts to provide high-quality education for youth in their care?
I really would suggest that folks take this package and use it as a framework or a place to start. Take these 5 principles, review them, and then step back and do a quick self-assessment. Or you may want to even bring in an outside expert just to look at things with a different lens. Determine if you're meeting these principles. Are you meeting them in a comprehensive manner? Or are you meeting them minimally, or somewhere in between? I think, once you can really step back and make those decisions, then establish an action plan to move the system forward over time. And you're going to do this through policy development, which always takes time. Then there's the practice change that needs to occur once the policy is developed. That takes staff development on the part of the leadership and for staff to acclimate to whatever the new practices are that are being promoted by the policies. Assess the outcomes. So now we have new practices, and are we in fact seeing the outcomes that we expected, both from staff and also from the youth? So this is where you're looking at your data to determine whether or not you're seeing some improvement there. And then, how to sustain this work. It's very difficult always to change practice, but gosh, it is really hard to sustain a change in practice over time, especially if leadership changes or you have key staff that maybe is promoted to another position. You want to make sure that they carry through with whatever that continuum is, whatever that practice is, in their new job as well. And then, and finally, make sure you have a strong quality assurance process in place so that over time this can be sustained, or even over the time while you're implementing these 5 principles, along with maybe some core activities that you wrote up in your action plan. Put in some tests, some ways to assess whether or not you are implementing them in a comprehensive manner. So I think those are some things that school districts and facilities may be able to engage in pretty quickly in taking this guidance package and really making it work for them and truly promoting quality educational programs within their facility schools.
Well, I know that in many ways we've just scratched the surface of the guidance package and the guiding principles, so I'm glad we'll spend the rest of the time today hearing from some states about how they're really embodying the work envisioned by the package. Before we do that, Joaquin, do you have a final message or charge that you'd like to send on to all the administrators, teachers, line staff, and everyone else who's involved in the care of youth in confinement when it comes to the importance of high-quality education for these young people?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. And again, thanks for the time to be able to articulate some deeper thoughts on what we've done to support correctional education across the country. And I guess my final sort of closing thoughts would be to say that as an educator, as a minority male in this country, it's really hard for me to overstate how important this work is, and especially that it's emanating from the White House and from the federal departments of education and justice. And I say that not just as an employee of the government, but as an educator of over 17 years who really has marveled at the shift in approach, has really marveled at the shift from really just thinking about how we discipline and punish our youth offenders to recognizing that they're human beings with value, they're human beings with assets, human beings with dreams and hopes and aspirations like any other person, and that finding themselves in the juvenile justice system should not and simply cannot be the end of the line when it comes to providing them with supports and services that can enable them to become productive citizens, after they're released from their commitment. We have an obligation to them. They're entitled to an educational opportunity while they're incarcerated, or I should say confined to these facilities. And so it really does bring me great hope that with this guidance, communities can do what I think lots of communities have been struggling and trying to do for a very long time, which is to move the needle. The federal government didn't lead on this. This is being led and has been led by a grassroots, by a great many facilities that have really taken up this paradigm shift and taken up the charge and said to their local communities, to their states, that we need to do a better job of supporting these young people, because they come back into communities and they need those skills and they need those resources to be successful. Because if we don't invest in them now, while they're in detention and while they're young, then we're going to have to invest in them later. And so, I think a simple cost-benefit analysis tells us that we get a bigger bang for a buck, and that we really do meet our moral obligation to our young people by investing education in the education that they need now while they're in these facilities. And really then not just telling facilities they need to do a better job, but supporting them with effective policy, supporting them with information on best practices that they can implement at the local level, but by supporting, as Simon alluded to a little while ago, the kind of cross-sector collaboration that is necessary. Education and the justice system can't do it by themselves. We need to see a lot more collaboration, better collaboration among multiple youth-serving systems across the board, so that once young people are released and back into communities and back into community schools, they don't find themselves alone, they don't find themselves isolated, they don't find themselves having to sort of rely on old skill sets to achieve new challenges. We just know that's not going to happen. So really important that adults at every level of the system that work with youth offenders are thinking new about how to collaborate to help us achieve these ends. And so tremendously hopeful and really do appreciate and value all of the hard work that many thousands of people are doing across the country to make a difference in the lives of these kids. There really is, in many cases, no harder challenge. And so, from the federal government to those practitioners and to those professionals, we really do value and appreciate their work.
Thank you for that, Joaquin. And thanks to you as well, Simone, for taking the time to be with us today. That's Joaquin Tamayo, a Special Assistant in the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Simone Gonslin, the Director of NDTAC. So now that we have a little background on the Correctional Education Guidance Package, let's learn more about how the principles and practices within the package are being exemplified by some juvenile justice jurisdictions. Alexandra has our first look.
In 2010, Ohio's State Board of Education adopted the Common Core State Standards. Since that time, the state has been working to implement the standards across all content areas, and for the 2014-15 school year, Ohio will use new standardized tests aligned with the Common Core. For Ohio, the adoption of the Common Core's rigorous standards is aimed at making all students in the state college and career ready. And in Ohio, this includes youth who are educated in juvenile correctional settings. Ohio's Department of Youth Services, or DYS, operates 3 facilities, which houses, in total, approximately 500 of the state's youth, most in need of supervision. Here to talk to me about Ohio's commitment to high-quality education within juvenile correctional settings are Carl Koenig, an Assistant Director of Federal Programs and the State Title I Part D Coordinator at the Ohio Department of Education, and Jennifer Sanders, the Deputy Director of Education and Reentry Services at the Ohio Department of Youth Services and the Superintendent of Schools for Buckeye United School District. Carl, Jennifer, welcome to the program. Carl, let's start with you. How has Ohio prioritized education for youth who are educated in juvenile correctional facilities? Is the state focused on making these students truly college and career ready?
I think it's safe to say that one of the things we've tried to do is not think of Buckeye United, which is our Department of Youth Services, as anything other than a school district. And that really took hold in the 2012-13 school year when we conducted a review. We call it our School Improvement Diagnostic. And it is a review diagnostic that goes in and looks at our low-performing schools and looks at adult behavior and administrative factors that serve as barriers to school improvement. It also looks at the things that the schools are doing well and provides best practices on how to change. Historically, that wasn't something we had done with the Department of Youth Services with Buckeye United. In that year, we did, and that really has served as a springboard to some reforms that have been implemented at Buckeye United over the last 2 school years, and really served as kind of the focal point and starting point for a bettered relationship between the Department of Education and the Department of Youth Services.
And Jennifer, how does the state's vision and philosophy, if you will, regarding these students translate at the facility level? We know security is often the first priority within juvenile correctional facilities, but how are your facilities also prioritizing education? What has been the approach?
Well, what we find, our kids come to us at an older age now, but we find that they have certain educational needs. We find that about 85% or more of them come to us at least 2 grade levels below in reading and math. They come to us with a lower level of credits than their age would indicate. And so what we try and do in Department of Youth Services is recognize that and adapt and adjust to it. We also have found that a lot of our youth come to us with what could be termed traumatic backgrounds. And so we've really started to work in understanding how behavioral health, education, all these programming and treatment actually can provide better security than the traditional model of security. So one of the things that we embarked upon as a department in the last year was significantly reducing our amount of seclusion, which is the time that we put our youth behind their door for misbehavior. Early in the year, we were in we had months where we had over 10,000 hours of seclusion with our population. And by the end of December, we were just under 1,000 hours. What we found to be effective as a department, and this is really tying into how education really now has a seat at the table and is really becoming one of the focal points of what we're doing. To do that, what we found is education and other treatment and programming becomes our security mechanism. That if our kids are productively engaged in effective and meaningful programming, that's the best security that we can provide. So, we have worked very diligently within our department to make sure that all the programming providers are at the table when decisions are made. We have monthly meetings with facility administration where we go over data, and some of that data is about seclusion hours, some of it's about incidents, and some of it's even about education data like attendance data and credits, because the department has really made a paradigm shift in this past year to focus upon programming as the best security. And the Department of Education has been fantastic with helping us through this revolution, if you will, because they have provided us with the supports we need to really engage our teachers and our staff in a way to make all of our programming better.
That would make sense, having everyone on board to help make programming successful, which in turn, as you mentioned, improves facility safety. That coordination between agencies and departments is critical. And Carl, I gather that the fact DYS was such a willing and able partner in this approach has really reinforced the decision to move in this direction. Would you say that's accurate?
As part of our school improvement reform strategies in the state, when we look at our low-performing schools, we have them implement something called the Ohio Improvement Process, which really does look at adult actions and adult behaviors and administrative tasks that do get in the way of school reform. It's making sure everyone's looking at the same data set, having discussions about your data, and really taking the idea of developing a comprehensive needs assessment at kind of the core foundation, and making sure that the important people that are impacting and making educational decisions are at the table. And over the last kind of year and a half, we've seen the Department of Youth Services implement this model just like we would see implemented in any other school district. And given the unique circumstances and situations, That's a huge undertaking, but they've done it with fidelity and really embraced our reform process. That has led to a lot of fruitful conversations, which has allowed us to move and really refocus our Title I funds in the Department of Youth Services to where we are now able to use an institution-wide model because we feel that the staff buy-in is there, the clear identification of needs are there, and the capacity to really do a school-wide or institution-wide reform is there like we would see in other schools. And I can't stress how important that is to see and think of Buckeye United in the schools as another school district. Yes, they have certain conditions and barriers, but what's the primary focus? Educating kids, helping kids get on a trajectory to be college and career ready. And in the last 2 years, we've seen kind of a renaissance, if you will, a drastic change in how they're preparing their youth to meet the new standards that we're putting in place. They're moving in concert with us, not 2 steps behind or on their own path, and it's been a very collaborative process and one that we're going to continue to work on going forward.
Carl, you mentioned changing some things around with federal funds at the state level. Has DYS also shifted funding in any way to better support high-quality education within the Buckeye United facilities?
I think I would just say that we work together to find additional resources, both state and federal, to overhaul the computer systems within DYS. I think that's something we should probably highlight. Right, Jen?
But also, while we don't know if we're going to get this grant, the fact of the matter is I know that I have advocates at the Department of Education that help advocate for my school district. So an example of that would be there have been several opportunities for funding that would not traditionally and did not traditionally include the Buckeye United School District. And because of the collaborations we've built, my Department of Education colleagues have been more than happy to step up and say we don't understand why they're not. And we've actually been able to apply for grant opportunities that previously we had not been able to. So that is a huge benefit for us as a school district, not only in identity, but of course in funding sources.
Well, it certainly sounds like the state is committed to doing what's necessary to support education for youth in Buckeye United, so that's great. I want to turn now to looking within the facilities themselves a little bit. And while the DYS schools are treated just like any other school in the state from an administrative standpoint, we all know the dynamics within correctional facilities are different than in community schools. Jennifer, in your opinion, what are some of the challenges teachers and other education staff face in providing high-quality education within correctional facilities?
Well, teachers will tell you that student motivation is probably one of the greatest factors. But I don't know that that's demonstrably different from public schools. However, I think that it probably manifests a little differently within corrections. And having worked in corrections for 20 years, I think I could probably say that. What's interesting, though, about student motivation is that actually the adults can help do things to make that better, and that's what we've been working on. The other things that we do is we actually try and keep our class sizes at a reasonable level. We understand that our population, about 50%, 40 to 50% of our population is special education. They have an IEP, compared to Ohio in general, which is 15 to 20%. We also know that of the 40 to 50% of our youth that are special education, 50% of those are emotionally disturbed, right? They have the emotional disturbance category, whereas in Ohio, you're looking at 7 to 10%. So we do know that there are differences, and what we're trying to do with these two strategies, and then also moving with adding some technology pieces to the classrooms, is try and work through and help our students understand and work through those particular barriers to education.
And I'd like to point out that prior to Jen taking or running the shop over at DYS, when we did our diagnostic review, one of the things that we found in the feedback we were getting is that teachers didn't feel they had access to high-quality educational-related professional development. There was a lot of barriers to receiving educational-focused PD because they thought that there was a focus on corrections. And we can say that there's been a dramatic shift in the type of professional development that the teachers are receiving, and that has played a part in the reforms that we've been seeing over at Department of Youth Services.
And speaking of professional development, Jennifer, I understand your facilities have taken concrete steps toward training teachers on managing their classrooms to help create positive learning environments. Can you tell us what that would look like?
Sure. We have actually recently contracted with a gentleman named Larry Thompson. He runs a program called Responsibility-Centered Discipline. And this program actually teaches our teachers how to act, not react, when a student starts to become emotional. You know, because sometimes when you're faced with a youth coming at you or starting to get angry, you know, you start to react to that. What we're trying to do is teach our teachers how to act in a way that redirects the youth, in a way that the youth can then take responsibility for their actions, for their emotions, and make better decisions. We've also contracted with Robert Hall, who is a school psychologist out of Maryland, and he has written an online course on supporting and educating traumatized students. Because we know our students do have, in a lot of cases, traumatic backgrounds, and it's important that our teachers understand how that can manifest in the classroom. A lot of times when you look at trauma-informed care, there's a lot of behavioral health theory, but what we really liked about this course is understanding how that looks in the classroom and some strategies that our teachers can employ to address that in a way that's productive and doesn't continue either damaging or making the situation worse.
So, looking specifically at the academic programming within the Buckeye United facilities, how is it aligned with college and career readiness or other standards Ohio has adopted for all students in the state?
Well, frankly, we're completely in line with them. We do not deviate from that requirement. All of our youth that graduate do so with the same requirements as public school here in Ohio. We run as a school district like the public education when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to the standards, and when it comes to graduation requirements. What we do differently is we actually have an additional postsecondary component as a school that not all public school models would have. So we have really shifted not just to the high school instruction because, again, our kids come to us much older. What we have found is that we actually have to adopt some of the adult models when it comes to instruction and programming. So we've already been in an agreement with Ashland University to provide post-secondary college classes. We're actually working with them now to develop an associate's degree for our kids and starting to do the Pell Grants while they are with us. You know, we had previously done the FAFSA with them prior to leaving, but now we're moving it into the actual facility. That will be new this year, along with the upgrade to the associate's degree. We are also have developed and are seeing some really great benefits to apprenticeship programming. Prior to 2013, the Department of Youth Services never had an apprentice program, primarily because the kids were much younger. But now we know that employment is a really big issue with our youth. So it made sense for us to develop 5 apprenticeship programs in which we worked with our Ohio Apprenticeship Council through the United States Department of Labor to legitimize. And our kids now are actually working and receiving the ability to get that certificate-bearing program. So we've done those. We've also really started to increase and improve our employment readiness programming. We have installed and implemented one-stops at all of our facilities, all three, where our kids actually get to go in, go to the Ohio Means Jobs website, look for jobs. They have an account when they leave us in which they put in queue some of the jobs, and then when they go out to this community, they can go to the local community one-stop and pick up right where they left off with us.
And I'm assuming the apprenticeships are linked to job and career opportunities within the state, that youth are connected to some legitimate next steps when they leave the facilities?
Absolutely. That was we had to marry what our kids can do inside the facility work-wise, as well as what our job opportunities were. And the Ohio Apprenticeship Council was fantastic in helping us do that.
Taking a step back, what about those students who do want to go back to high school to complete their education? Are the Buckeye United facilities preparing them for that? I know Ohio is part of the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, or PARC. Are the students in Buckeye United assessed using those same standards?
Sure. The state of Ohio requires for graduation for any youth that started high school this school year, that they have to take a series of PARC exams and actually some state exams in social studies and science. So we actually, this month, we have been testing our kids just like the public schools in those PARC and AIR exams, so that the fact when they leave us, it was just like they transferred to Columbus City schools, to Cleveland schools. That type of transition is equitable. They will receive the same scores, the same results, because we understand that it is incumbent upon us by state law, but also because it's the right thing to do, to make sure that our students have the same education access as public schools. So yes, all of our kids will go through the same assessments. The other thing that we do offer that a lot of public schools don't is we actually do offer the GED as an alternate examination and an alternate completion.
So clearly, Ohio and Buckeye United are committed to high-quality education within the juvenile correctional facilities. And I'm assuming that commitment is reinforced by the positive things you're seeing in the facilities. Is Ohio or DYS tracking the impact of education and related programming on things like recidivism or other outcomes? What are you seeing?
I would say it's something that we discuss every time, and we try to get together quarterly or at least either in person or over the phone, and we talk about, have you seen changes in classroom behavior, and has education served as the foundation for reducing the number of incident reports you're seeing, seclusions, in helping with those kids who are transitioning? And I think I can echo a lot of my counterparts in saying that while we're not where we want to be in terms of tracking youth once they leave a facility, in terms of looking at their progress coming out, I think the conversations we're starting to have are truly positive in how education is being incorporated and used as a way to make a facility a better place. And I'll segue now to Jennifer to talk about some of the things that we've seen, but that's something we've talked about and something that's been a very positive conversation we've had in the last year.
Well, the other thing that is interesting, there's always anecdotal information that, frankly, as an educator, I love to see. I love to go in and see kids reading that probably would not have read before. But when you look at actual data, we do analyze the data. A lot of, like Carl had mentioned, with all of these pieces that we're looking about classroom and helping our students understand their responsibility and the discipline and their own discipline and keeping themselves engaged in school, we are tracking incidents. We are tracking recidivism. We do actually track how we transition our kids out, not just in education, but in all the other domains that affect criminology. In fact, we are right now, I'm meeting with our Bureau Chief of Parole to talk about what are all the needs that our youth have and how education and all the other areas fit within that, and how we can then put improvement models in place on transitioning our youth. Because I understand, I think people that would be listening to this will understand how important education is, but it's not the total picture. What's important, though, is that all of us are at the table having the conversation about how we transition youth, so that we can have improved measures.
Well, in wrapping up, is there anything else either of you would like to say about your experiences implementing high-quality education within the DYS facilities, or about what the field needs to do moving forward to make students educated in correctional settings truly college and career ready?
From my chair, it has been a very worthwhile task to spend the time to get to know my counterpart, to work with Jen, and to have these discussions, because she and I are able to have open and frank discussions to talk about whether it be positives, negatives. We can put everything on the table and have those tough conversations at times. And it's been a great working relationship and has really been a way that I am able to understand what DYS is trying to accomplish and how, from my chair as a Title I Part D coordinator, I can help make that happen and be a resource rather than a barrier. And there was, and sometimes are, you have communication divides because you don't have those interpersonal relationships. And if I could take anything and pass along to my counterpart or whoever takes my position in this, get to know the people on the other side. That makes the conversations you have more beneficial and can allow you to move on a trajectory for change if it's needed or for continued growth.
And from my perspective, I guess I would like other directors of education to understand that it's okay to ask for help. We are all in this for the kids. So I know at the end of the day, even if Carl and I don't agree, even if he has to tell me that I need to fix something, that something's not right, I know that he and I both believe that this is about the kids. So go in knowing that you don't have to do it alone, that there are people that can help, and it does take a village to raise a child.
Carl, Jennifer, I want to thank you both so much for joining us today. Jennifer, I know you'll be able to answer some questions at the end of the program, and we look forward to hearing even more about Ohio's great educational programming in correctional settings in the future.
Thank you, Alexandra. Moving now from the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon is another example of a state that is prioritizing high-quality education for youth educated in justice settings. Like Ohio, Oregon too feels that all youth should be prepared for college and careers, and over the last few years, the state has taken the steps to make this a reality. Joining us today to discuss how Oregon and its state-run juvenile correctional facilities are embodying the guiding principles for providing high-quality education in juvenile secure care are Sam Coe, an educational specialist with the Oregon Department of Education, and Ron Wassam, the principal at Monroe High School, which is on the grounds of the Eastern Oregon Youth Correctional Facility. Sam, Ron, thanks so much for being with us today. Now, we've just heard from Ohio, and in some ways you've taken similar approaches, but I do want to start with you, Sam, and have you tell us a little bit about Oregon's approach to making sure all students are college and career ready, even those educated in correctional facilities.
We've made it a very high priority for our kids to have an education that is very similar, or if not equal, to the education that students receive on the outside. And we have a law and statute in Oregon where kids in our facilities are treated the same financially as kids in regular school districts. So when kids in school districts have access to funding such as a couple of years ago school improvement funds or other activities or special programs, our sites are also eligible for those funds. In addition to that, our state funds the education for the youth at twice the average amount of a kid in a regular K-12 setting. So those are one of the ways that we make it a priority for our students, because we all know the more education that our students receive, their chance of returning or recidivating is really low.
So, Ron, just some background for our listeners. Monroe High School is on the grounds of the Eastern Oregon Youth Correctional Facility, a facility that houses roughly 50 young men, most of whom are sex offenders. Now, obviously, this is a population that is uniquely at risk both when they enter the facility and after they leave. So, how are Eastern Oregon and Monroe working to accomplish the state's goal of preparing all its youth for success once back in the community?
Well, I will say, in terms of from Monroe's standpoint, when I first took this job a little over 3 years ago, there was a new superintendent of the correctional facility here, and he pulled me in and said that they essentially have a three-legged approach to serving the needs of the youth within the facility, and that deals with their treatment, instilling some sort of work ethic, so jobs within the facility or through our vocational programs, and then education. And all three of those have to work together. If any one of those three pieces are missing, then the youth really aren't coming out in the direction that's the focus of OIA. So we work very closely with the administration here at Eastern Oregon Youth Correctional Facility to make sure that we can augment each other within those areas, treatment, work, and education. So there's a lot of support between the two.
And how does that support between partners work on a day-to-day basis?
The nice thing here is we are a small enough facility. We look at the total number of education staff is 10. When those aren't 10 FTE, full FTE, some are part-time employees. But we're small enough that we see each other every day. We communicate with OIA staff that are in the classroom or in the shop or in the entire facility. And then the administration of East Oregon Youth Correctional Facility are out and about in the classrooms as well. So there's just a lot of communication that just happens naturally just because of the size of the facility, I believe. And then my office is directly across the hall from the superintendent's office, and so we are in conversation multiple times through the day. So, yeah, we have a plan, we have a philosophy, we work together, and work together as an education team, as a correctional facility team. We work together, I think, very, very well.
Now, Ron, we've heard from Ohio how they've implemented the Common Core and the PARC assessments in their juvenile correctional facilities. Oregon has also adopted the Common Core, and it's working with the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. How is the education program at Monroe adapted to these standards and assessments?
Well, one of the first things that we had to do was make sure that our computer hardware was up to the standards needed for Smarter Balanced. So we took a look at that and made some changes there. And then it was working with the teaching staff, helping them to become a little more familiar with the Common Core and how to implement. Many times curriculum is aligned to Common Core, but how do you really implement? How do you change the mode of instruction to prepare students for not just Smarter Balance, but to be successful transitioning from one type of class to another? So I'll use mathematics as an example. We're really seeing with the Common Core in math that a number of the standards and concepts that we teach as math teachers are being pushed down to lower levels. So how do we do that? Even though we know what the standards are, how do we make sure that the students are really getting a good feel of those standards and are seeing success before they move on to that next level at essentially a younger age, at a lower grade level? So that takes time. That is ongoing. I don't think we can ever say we're there 100% because you're continually modifying curriculum and looking at that with the Common Core. So we took some time to do that, and there are some financial concerns when you do that for substitute costs or possibly sending someone to a workshop and just collaborating with others. And then looking at textbooks, are the textbooks that we have, are they aligned to the core? Do they really address the needs? Do we need some supplemental materials? So those grants really helped with that priority, which we have right now in Oregon.
Now, obviously, any change to the way education is run at any level and in any school can be difficult, but Monroe seems to have embraced this change head on. But I want to ask you the same question Alexander brought up with the DYS facilities in Ohio. What are the main challenges from your perspective as principal to implementing high-quality education in a school within a correctional setting?
Well, if we look how education has changed over the last 15, 20, even the last 10 years, but definitely over the last 15, 20, we see what role technology plays in the everyday classroom, and that does provide a challenge for us. We obviously limit internet usage with our youth. We don't want them really getting out on the internet and being able to communicate with others, and definitely limit the number of the websites that they can go to. So just with standard instruction, which may be done in a standard high school, research papers, or just research for a general assignment, we have to be very careful with that. So that is tightened down considerably within the correctional facilities. So that does tighten down the opportunities that the students have and also the creativity of the teacher. Also, just the tools that you can bring into a classroom. We'll talk, I'm sure, about vocational programs in a little bit, but some of those classroom tools, my background is in chemistry, as a chemistry and math teacher. I taught some chemistry here at the beginning of the school year, and normally I would bring in some glassware, bring in some things for some labs to do demonstrations and such. We can't do that with these youth. There's certain things you can't have in the units, and so you have to kind of rethink how you can present material. So that causes some challenges as well. Classroom management, one might think with these type of youth, is a real concern, and it's minimal. When I look at other programs or look at classes that I dealt with either as a teacher or as a principal for a K-12 high school for 13 years, it's really minimal. Classroom management isn't as big of an issue probably as it is in the traditional classroom. So that's a nice thing. You're spending less time dealing with that. But there are enough challenges that are just inherent to a correctional facility that you have to be a little more creative, and it really can test the teacher.
So clearly some innovation and creativity is needed to overcome some of these challenges. Now, curricula and instruction is one thing, but what about the learning environment itself? After all, this is a correctional facility we're talking about. How have you worked to make Monroe and even the Eastern Oregon facility itself environments that are conducive to learning for your students?
We work closely with the Oregon Youth Authority staff here. The students are placed on various tag levels, essentially is what privileges they have, and so that carries over into the classroom as well. So if there are times when students may be able to listen to music while they're doing some of the classwork, if they're at that tag level, we allow them to do that, and that's kind of a nice carrot for a number of students. Not just in music, but some of the other privileges. So we work closely with OIA with their tag levels and what we allow the students to utilize or bring into the classroom. Also look at the type of offerings that we do have here. The vocational program is pretty popular and it's pretty successful, and we want to expand upon that. And again, if they're getting close to behavior and academically reaching certain places where we think we can allow them to go over and essentially trust them in a vocational setting, we do that. So having some of those, having goals for the youth and having some of those carrots out there that they can kind of work towards, I think has made it pretty successful and created a positive environment within the classroom and within the facility.
So it sounds like the facility as a whole has a system in place that really encourages the youth to work hard in the classroom, make smart decisions, and stay on their best behavior so that they can take advantage of the opportunities available to them if they do.
Absolutely. I think any time that you throw expectations out there, it may take a while, but I think the students often rise to those expectations. With our special ed population, and many times this is just minor issues in reading or math, and then sometimes it's more extensive than that, but within the IEP process, we set goals, and we set goals with the youth that are not on IEPs, kind of through a personal education plan, much more informal, however, but with the goals set out there, the youth know what they need to do to become successful academically and help transition into the real world. So we try to offer classes and programs that help fit the goals that we set with the youth, and just to make them more successful once they leave here. And I think that in and of itself helps create a positive environment.
Sam, I want to bring you back in here. Is what Ron's doing similar to efforts around the state to make correctional and other secure care settings more conducive to learning? Are there issues related to this that you're working on?
Yes. One of the things that we are working with OIA, and we did bring this up at our last statewide YSEP principals meeting, was the use of restraints and seclusion or isolation, because that is an area that has been recognized that is not conducive to learning and for the development of our kids. So, and then that is something that we are definitely talking with our juvenile justice partners with, and so forth. And that is something, as Ron said, working in a correctional facility, sometimes it does need to happen, but we're still working some things out and so forth. And then that are some of the things that are on our radar.
So Ron, I want to turn to the specific programming at Monroe, and I know the school offers a lot of career and technical training. Can you tell us a little bit about your programs and how they're preparing the students for when they leave?
Yeah, it's changed. The complexion has really changed over the last 6-7 years here at Monroe, and what we've offered and how we're going about offering the various courses here. I have a half-time mechanics teacher with over 30 years teaching experience in mechanics and metals and some auto body work, who was actually an employee of mine at the traditional high school here in town, but he's here half-time doing work on gas engines. We started off with small gas engines, lawnmowers, and chainsaw types of engines, those types of things. From there, moved on to full-scale gas engines, vehicle engines, and which are what the youth are working on right now. We are going to be making a move towards diesel engines here soon. We actually have already obtained a couple very nice large diesel engines from the community. We're in a very remote setting. We're about 130 miles from anywhere in any direction if you see where Burns, Oregon is on the map. And so we're looking at an agricultural area here. We've had a couple different ranchers who have donated engines out of swathers, combines, types of things, and so we have those here sitting ready for the next step, moving towards diesel engines. So the mechanic shop, very, very popular, and the guys take a lot of ownership in those projects that they do within that shop. We also have a wood shop program. Construction technology, kind of focusing more on the wood shop aspect right now. We do a lot with safety, obviously, of the various hand tools, power tools, and the youth do a number of their own projects. But the thing that I'm really proud of is the number of projects they do for the community. Most recently, constructed a small, we call them neighborhood libraries, that we see popping up in other communities, on certain blocks within the neighborhood where there's books that can be checked in or traded in and out. That's something we want to establish here in this community. So we were asked to maybe build a prototype, a little community library for that, or neighborhood library. So that has just gone out the door. We do a number of projects for the local Forest Service and BLM district offices here, so signs for campgrounds, for roads and such. That's been happening for the last year or so, and it's going to be continuing through some of our computer-aided routing equipment here. So that gives the youth some opportunities to work with kind of state-of-the-art technology for sign making and for wood carving, essentially. And they enjoy that because it's put together the technology along with the woodworking. Something else we do here, which is a little unique, is these youth, and we talk about the ages that the youth are here, in their teens. So many of them don't have any experience behind the wheel, and once they leave here, it'd be nice if they knew how to drive or to have a little bit of experience with rules of the road and such. So we offer a driver's education program here. And so we do obviously some of the book, the manual work, but we have a driver simulator. Very nice system. 3 27-inch monitors, very reactive. The great software that goes along with that. We can control weather, types of vehicle being driven, traffic patterns, so on and so forth. So the youth have the opportunity. The graduates, those that have graduated high school, one of the things we do with them is we can put them into this program, and once they successfully complete the driver simulation, get X number of hours on that, we go to the next step, which is to put them on little 2-seat go-karts. So we have a couple of go-karts here. As I said, they're 2 seats, so we can have a staff member with them. And we set up a little driving course in the courtyard here of our facility. And so they have to actually obey the rules of the road and follow the traffic patterns, so on and so forth. So that's been very popular. And it's always fun to watch those guys get excited about their turn to get in to use the go-kart. So I don't know of any other facility doing that right now. And I think all of these skills are skills that can be transferred into the outside world, into work environments. So again, very popular with the boys. They want to be able to get in there and do that, and they're excited for the opportunities.
Well, that's certainly a comprehensive program. And is this training aligned with or linked to college and career readiness standards in the state?
One of the requirements for graduating in Oregon is that students have been exposed to what we call CRLEs, the career-related learning standards, expectation standards. So we try to offer that within our normal classroom setting, some through the vocational program as well, but a lot of through the what we consider a traditional classroom setting here at the facility, and that is somewhat difficult, again, because of technology requirements at times, just getting out there and doing some of the searches. But one thing we do have accessible to us, which we use in depth, is something called Career Information Services, or a CIS program. It's actually housed through the University of Oregon, and I think that's available essentially nationwide. But our youth do utilize a number of those services, which can be from career interests to looking at their own strengths. And it's a very comprehensive program. So we use the CIS. We also offer programs that talk about budgeting. So some of those personal finance issues that really affect every youth graduating, but we really stress that here: budgeting, those career prep things in terms of working with resumes, as I said, using the CIS. One thing we haven't done here yet that I want to get going is doing mock interviews. So getting those youth that are especially close to exiting the program, bring in some people from the community so they're unfamiliar faces to them, and to go through an interview process for a job. Again, that's been very successful at the extent that's being done at the local high school here. It's been a very, very extensive program there. I want to get that going here within Monroe as well, so I'm hoping to do that here within the next few months, in fact. And then college courses too, in terms of career readiness. Not only is it vocational, many times it's just we need to do more training, need to have more education. So we do offer some college courses. We're expanding upon that, and we're at the process now. I've just been accepted within the last week or so to offer CLEP testing through the College Board, so that youth, once they complete these college courses, can take the CLEP test, which is recognized by, I think, over more than 2,300 colleges, universities for college credit at a relatively minimal fee. So we're excited to get that going. It's something we've been working on now for almost 2 years. So not only is it vocational hands-on types of programs, as well as the work programs that OYA offers within the facility itself that are not tied to the school, but then also offering more training and education through college prep or college courses.
Now, clearly all of this is done with the goal of successfully transitioning these youth out of the facility and back into their communities. Do you have a sense for the impact the education and training provided by Monroe is having on the outcomes for these youth once they leave?
Well, for a number of our youth, they already have an idea where they may want to go, working with family and such. Being sex offenders, many times the employment opportunities are quite limited. So they may want to go back and work on a farm, or go work in construction, or work in a shop with a family member. And so those are the students that really take these programs seriously here within the vocational offerings that we have. Unfortunately, we don't track a number of our students once they leave here, just because of places they go and maybe a couple different step-down types of programs they go to that we just don't follow that. But that would be some good data to have to see what they actually do end up doing. The rate of recidivism is obviously tracked by OIA and by the state, but in terms of vocationally what they do, that is not something that we track. But again, we work with their individual plans. What is it you want to do? What can we offer, or what do we offer that can help be a foundation to build upon to where you want to go, and let's set some goals that direction.
And is Monroe or the facility at large tracking things like recidivism rates for the youth?
First off, which was surprising to me, in terms of rate of recidivism, it's actually quite low for juvenile sex offenders. So just overall nationwide, that number is going to be lower than what we may see with other types of youth in the general population. That said, talking with some of the parole officers and others that the boys are released to or the boys are working with, again, we have that plan. Here's where are they going to be once they leave here? How can we help in that transition? And I think just working with people on the outside that these youth are going to be working with is a big part of giving them those skills to help them be stable once they leave the walls of the correctional facility. Again, with the sex offenders, there are so many things they can't do, be it from once they leave here. Maybe they aren't allowed to have access to the internet or have smartphones. Maybe they can't ride public transportation, limitations on where they can live, and then obviously limitations on where they can work. So they're already kind of hamstrung in terms of what they can do once they leave here, but we really want to focus on what they can do and make that transition better. So I think we're on the right path.
So, Sam, the state is tracking other outcomes related to youth receiving education in the correctional facilities, correct?
Right, and then we do know this is a fact. When school and vocational activities are not available to our students, the rate of infractions and the rate of disciplinary actions rises. For instance, like when our teachers or schools go on Christmas break, summer break, or the spring break, during that break period, because the kids are not in school or participating in vocational activities, unfortunately our kids get into mischief, and OIA has a greater, our juvenile justice partners have a greater rate of disciplinary actions. That is why it is our regulations. It's part of Oregon Administrative Rule, which has the same effect as law, where we provide education in 11 months out of the school year versus 9 months for regular ed.
Well, Ron, Sam, we want to thank you both again for joining us today. Before we wrap up, we want to give you the same opportunity as your colleagues in Ohio. Is there anything else you would add to this conversation about your perspectives on implementing high-quality education within juvenile correctional settings? Any messages for your peers working toward the same goal of helping youth educated in these settings ready for college and careers?
Well, I will say for those who may be entering the realm that I'm working in terms of an administrator within a school, within a correctional facility, there are a lot of questions. You know, how do we do X, Y, and Z? Working closely with the state, Sam has been wonderful to work with for having those someone you can call and get answers to. Because I will say, when I entered this program, coming from a K-12 building for 20-some years, 15 years as a teacher, 13 years as a principal, I really didn't know what to expect, both from a classroom environment to the financial aspect. It's completely different than it is for our traditional settings, and just working with the youth, working with another facility, because we're essentially a facility within a facility, a school within a prison, and I didn't know what types of roadblocks and barriers there would be to get towards our educational goals. But what I found was there's actually less barriers in many cases. I've talked about, you know, the internet and tools that we try to do in classrooms that we can't just because of the security issues. But as an administrator, the really nice thing is every decision I make on a daily basis directly affects the youth. Where at the high school setting, I couldn't say that. It's just a much smoother process, I think, trying to get from A to Z within our facility. And as an administrator, I find myself working with a higher percentage of the youth on a daily basis than I did as a principal within a traditional high school, and that for me has been very rewarding as well. And because you're working very closely with youth, you know what the needs are, and that really helps form decisions that you're making within the building regarding vocational needs because of their individual education programs, and just goal setting for the school in conjunction with the youth authority here. So I can say that after 29 years in education, this is probably one of the most rewarding jobs that I've had. I really enjoy working within this facility and working with staff here, working with OIA, and working with ODE in a little different environment than I have in the past.
And then, Nick, at the state level, the stance that I have is I view my role as a role of support for the principals at the site, and then try to eliminate or overcome any administrative or statutory obstacles that they face to enable the principals to do their jobs and to make connections in their local communities to work with these students. And like the dedication that Harney County School District has for these youth is also exemplified by when they had their graduation last June, their school board chair was present. And I think she gave a little talk, which is, you know, at other sites, there is representation, but not the school board chair. And then all of this wouldn't be possible without our dedication and our interest from our juvenile justice partners or the Oregon Youth Authority. They're very committed, you know, towards the education and vocational training of our youth. So they too help us to eliminate barriers and so forth. So they are a very willing and able partner.
And once again, that very important component of partnership. Well, it certainly sounds like strong commitment across the board in Oregon. And I think that makes for a very good place to pause this conversation for now. So thank you both again. I know you're staying on the line to answer some questions for us, so we'll be back with you soon. Once again, our thanks to Sam Coe with the Oregon Department of Education and Ron Wasson, principal at Monroe High School, on the grounds of the Eastern Oregon Juvenile Correctional Facility. I also want to thank Carl Koenig of the Ohio Department of Education and Jennifer Sanders of the Ohio Department of Youth Services for taking time to speak with Alexandra today. All of you have given our listeners a glimpse into what it takes to realize the goal of preparing all students for success after high school, whether that be in post-secondary schooling, career training, or entering the workforce. More importantly, you've shown how that can and should be the accepted reality for even the most at-risk students, those educated in juvenile correctional settings. Indeed, this was the goal of the U.S. Departments of Education and Justice in creating the Correctional Education Guidance Package, and particularly the guiding principles. We know Ohio and Oregon are just two examples of states and jurisdictions around the country committed to and working to realize the same goals. Indeed, countless others out there are working just as hard to ensure that their youth are truly college and career ready. In the next program of our series focused on high-quality education in juvenile secure care settings, we'll explore the importance of strong leaders, both administrators and practitioners, in making college and career readiness for youth in such settings a reality. And we'll conclude the series in the coming months by taking a look at what's next for the field with regard to this topic. Stay tuned to NDTAC's website and listserv for more information on those N&D InFocus programs. We want to remind you that today's program will be archived on our website, www.neglected-delinquent.org. On the archive, you'll find, in addition to the recording, additional resources on this topic and more information about our guests. We encourage you to visit the archive and pass it along to your colleagues. And now we'd like to hear from you with your questions and comments.